As I began actually properly writing this script, it was the first Saturday since the 16th of April that I hadn't had a new episode of Spy Family to come home from work to. And I'll be honest, it really felt like something was missing from my day for the first couple of Saturdays. For the 11 weeks I was watching it week to week, this show was an incredibly important part of my week. Each episode a 25-minute escape from exams, from work, from life in general. And now we're a week away from the next season, and I cannot wait a second longer. My journey with Spy Family began with, of all things, YouTube and TikTok. The first episode must have come out the day before because I found the recommended algorithm and the For You page were pushing these videos of a new character, an adorable little kid by the name of Anya Forger. Pretty much the instant I watched one of these videos, seeing these very short clips of Anya's antics in the first episode, I knew this was a show that I needed to pick up. So I watched the first episode, and to say I was hooked was an understatement. I was immediately beyond excited for the next episode, and across this season that excitement never waned. I've well and truly fallen in love with this show, and waiting this long for more of it has been a task and a half for sure. But in the meantime, we have 12 episodes of content for me to run through, so it's time for me to break down why I love this show so much. But first...
Good morning, or perhaps good evening, dear viewer. If you enjoyed this channel's content and wish to see videos ahead of your YouTube release or receive bonus content, then Westalis has a mission for you. Consider subscribing to the Lo-Fi Media Reviews Patreon. On this Patreon page, not only will you get early access to all future videos, but you will also get an inside look into the process of making said videos. This includes clips from work-in-progress videos, material that doesn't make the cut of existing videos, audio bloopers, and even the notes taken when watching content for this channel. In addition, you will be able to lodge video requests, so if there is something that you wish this channel to talk about, you can place a request there. Not only will you be getting all this, but you will be supporting this channel and its continuing mission, for which Westalis would be very grateful. So please consider subscribing to the Lo-Fi Media Reviews Patreon. Thank you for your time. This message will now self-destruct.
This is the dumbest idea for a Patreon read I've ever had. I've only been doing it for a couple of videos, and this is already my dumbest idea. What the fuck am I doing? Also, yes, this is just a repurposed My Hero Academia cosplay.
The following few sections will be as spoiler-free as I can manage it, after which there will be a spoiler-heavy discussion of specific things I like about the show. But first, for the 3 people who clicked on this video and don't know what Spy Family is about, a quick synopsis. Super Spy Twilight works for WISE, the intelligence agency belonging to the country of Westalis. His mission is to infiltrate the country of Vestania, Westalis' neighbor, to surveil the leader of a fascist party that is gaining power and threatening war with Westalis. However, to complete his surveillance mission, he is forced to assemble a mock-up family for the purposes of passing as a parent and an upper-class citizen. His fake wife, a woman named Yor Breyer, is a merciless assassin by night. His child, the telepathic Anya. All of them are oblivious to each other's true nature, except of course for Anya, because she can read minds, and thus they get into wacky hijinks and silly nonsense as Twilight, posing under the name Lloyd Forger, and Yor go about their respective careers trying to hide it from each other, and Anya watches in awe and even tries to help out without her parents learning of her abilities. A highly entertaining setup, isn't it? I know when I first read that synopsis on Wikipedia, I was immediately sold on the project. So with that established, let's move on. I'm not sure why this is the first point I want to touch on in this video, probably because I don't have a lot to say about it, except for a couple of major points. In general, the original Japanese voice acting on the show is pretty damn good. Lloyd's voice has the right amount of authority required for a super spy father kind of character, but he can be pretty funny too. There are instances across the series where Lloyd is internally having a full-on anxiety attack, and Takio Aguchi's completely deadpan reading of these lines is pretty routinely hilarious. He's also able to get some comic mileage out of Lloyd's more animated panic attacks, and the balance just makes Lloyd feels so very alive as a character, especially compared to his dubbed counterpart, who we will come to later. Most of everyone else is pretty great too. Hiroyuki Yoshino is clearly having the time of his life playing Frankie, which gives him a nice fun energy, and Kazuhiro Yamaji perfectly embodies the cool and elegant Mr. Henderson. However, the MVPs of this cast for me have to be Sayori Hayami and Atsumi Tanizaki, who play Yor and Anya respectively. The range Hayami has in terms of delivery really brings Yor to life. For the most part, her voice is really sweet and calming, and and I don't exaggerate much when I say I could listen to her read the dictionary and I think I'd be happy. She can also be really funny when Yor is internally panicking, much like Iguchi as Lloyd, but what really sets her apart is how scary she can sound when the show calls for it. There are a couple of scenes where Yor switches from incredible violence to kind and caring on a dime, such as this scene where she beats up some street thugs and then consoles Anya, and Hayami portrays both absolutely flawlessly. She really is perfect for the role, and I can think of some scenes in the manga I am absolutely dying to hear her deliver when it comes to it. And as for Tanizaki as Anya, I've never been more impressed by a voice performance in my life. Look, faking the voice of a 5-year-old is not easy. Most attempts sound like incredibly phony falsettos and approach sounding like Saturday morning cartoons, resulting in kid characters mostly being super annoying in animated shows. However, Tanizaki, I don't know how she does it, but outside of 1 or 2 awkward line readings in episode 9, she legitimately sounds like a 5-year-old. It is uncanny, and it's not just in the voice, which I can't imagine is easy to do on its own. The inflections on words and sounds also sounds completely authentic. There are also moments in the show where Anya is putting on voices for her toys, so Tanizaki is voicing a kid trying to put on a deep voice when playing with her chimera, for example, and it still sounds perfectly natural. And that's just when she's reading lines. Even outside of that, like when Anya's laughing or crying, her work continues to sound real. There's a laugh she does somewhere in episode 12 that actually made me misty-eyed because it reminded me of my little siblings when they were young. The result is the suspension of disbelief is very rarely broken. Anya truly, absolutely feels like a 5-year-old character. It is honestly outstanding work, and it is my hope that Tanizaki has some awards coming her way when awards season rolls around. Man, that was a lot of praise about the original voice acting. What about the dub? Hey, remember when I said it's very easy to screw up when voicing a kid? Well, in a way, the English dub underlines how talented Tanizaki is because the dub version of Anya isn't good. Look, I don't mean any disrespect to Megan Shipman. I thought she was perfectly solid as La Brava in My Hero Academia, but her voice for Anya trends a lot more towards the Saturday morning cartoon vibe I mentioned earlier most of the time, to the point where I can almost see her in the recording booth on some of her line readings. The thing is, if I'd picked this show up and started watching it in dub, maybe I wouldn't have noticed and just rolled with it. But having Tanizaki's performance to compare it to, it's just not a competition. And this isn't a case of me saying dub bad, because I'll level with you, I usually watch anime in dub, but Shipman's take on Anya was honestly almost a deal breaker. That's not to say she's all terrible. In fact, I can think of a line reading she did in episode 1 that I thought was actually pretty funny, but she's just nowhere near as convincing as Tanizaki, and that's a massive shame. Now, if you think I'm being a little unfair, that it sounds like I'm writing a whole dub off based on one performance I don't like, let me assure you that's not the case. I'm not exactly doing cartwheels over Lloyd's dub voice either. Alex Organ just emphasizes the severe side of Lloyd a little too much, and as a result, he's not nearly as funny in dub as he is in sub. His voice is also arbitrarily a lot deeper in dub, which really threw me off. All in all, the balance of Iguchi's original performance just isn't there, leading to dub Lloyd feeling a lot more one note. To be completely fair, I do like some of the dub. Natalie Van Sistine sounds perfectly good as Yor, and Anthony Bowling is also clearly having a ball voicing Frankie. Yeah, that's the pun I'm rolling with. But overall, as a package, the dub was vastly underwhelming. If you want to pick this show up, I truly recommend watching it in sub. Going into this, I knew the show would look awesome, partly because of the clips I'd seen online before watching it, but also because I saw the name Cloverworks attached to it. Having gotten through My Dress Up Darling and come to the conclusion that its animation was the main draw to it, see my video on that for more details, I knew that Cloverworks turns out shows that look absolutely class. That in of its own would have sold me, but it turns out the show is a collaboration between Cloverworks and another studio, WIT, a studio from which I have never seen any work. No, I haven't watched Attack on Titan yet. Leave me alone. My best friend gives me heaps about it as it is. I will get to it. So this makes for an interesting dynamic, in that the studios take turns animating episodes, WIT doing the odd numbers, Cloverworks doing the even numbers. Now honestly, I haven't noticed a difference in quality across the episodes, but I have noticed that in general, the odd numbered episodes tend to be more action-oriented ones. And WIT's animation on the odd numbered episodes with said action should be highlighted here because it is incredible. Specifically, I want to look at 2 action scenes, one from episode 1 and one from episode 5. The one from episode 1, where Lloyd takes out enemy agents in the space of his room, is extremely short, but it is almost flawlessly animated. Lloyd's movements are exceptionally fluid, especially this shot of him rounding a table, grabbing a chair, and smashing it across somebody's face. This fight lasts all of 20 seconds, but is extremely memorable. And then on the other end of the spectrum of the action animation is the glorious flexing that is the castle sequence in episode 5. There is an entirely anime-only sequence involving Lloyd taking out a bunch of his own agents with bouncy balls for the entertainment of Anya, which sounds ridiculous ridiculous. Because it is ridiculous. But the direction of the scene takes it completely seriously, and the result is an incredibly exciting action sequence that is all at once silly and incredibly badass. Like, there's a shot where Lloyd uses his belt to slide down a wire, explosions behind him, and then he jumps off the rope, puts the belt back on mid-air, and then nails a superhero landing. It is 1,000 times more badass than the premise of man plays pretend with his daughter requires, and it is amazing. It sits on the perfect edge of cool and hilarious, and oh look, a segue. The comedy of this show is also perfectly directed. The writing is a massive part of that, of course, and I will touch on that later, but a lot of what makes the comedy land in this show is the absolutely flawless sense of comic timing that it has. One joke that leaps to mind is one from episode 11, when Lloyd is unable to decipher what a drawing Anya did is about. There's this perfect cut between two very close-up shots of Lloyd and Anya staring at each other silently, and the timing of the cut from Lloyd's incredulous face to Anya staring at him as kids do kills me every time. The fact that it cuts from a wider shot of the two of them to the close-up of Lloyd quietly judging Anya just makes it perfect. There's also a beautiful grasp of visual humor in this show. Some of these jokes are huge and hilarious, like the entirety of episode 10. There are several jokes in this episode that are considered to be almost perfect, such as the Dragon Ball reference that flew over my head on account of me never having seen the show, the choice to direct a couple of kids getting out in the dodgeball game as a death scene, the build-up of Anya's killer move that ends in her absolutely fluffing it, and of course, the sheer absolute scale of Bill Watkins. On their own, these more obvious visual jokes would be brilliant, but the show also knows how to do more subtle humor visually. A personal favorite of mine is in episode 12, seconds after York kicks someone so hard he gets embedded in a ceiling, where in the background, Lloyd enters the shot to see the man hanging from the ceiling just to say, wow, in a mildly surprised tone. It's seriously funny shit. Another directing thing I want to quickly touch on is the intense attention to detail to the smallest mundane things in life. The things that I don't think most would even think of. One example that leaps to mind is from episode 2, when Anya's being measured for new clothes. There's a quick shot of her tipping over clumsily as the tailor measures her, and it's such a real human moment that adds so much to the show. It's small decisions like that that give this show its personality, and I really appreciate the attention to detail. I also want to quickly touch on the visual design on the setting because it's really effective. While the show never explicitly says it's set in the 60s, the attention to detail in the art direction makes it perfectly obvious when it's set. All the technology is time appropriate, from the cars to the television sets, although the forges seem to have a color set. Not impossible for the time, but Wise definitely would have had to hand Lloyd a couple of bucks for that one. Some of the retro-futuristic touches in the gadgets Lloyd uses throughout his mission are also awesome, or misuses, in the case of him using a tape recorder 20 years ahead of its time for the purposes of taping Bondman for Anya. The style of Europe in the 60s is also perfectly captured. There's a pretty nifty article on the Crunchyroll website talking about the fashion design of the show, and while I'm a total numpty about fashion design, this article assures me that all of the clothes the characters wear across the series are authentic to the time period, apparently including that backless number Yor likes to wear around the house. I imagine her Thorn Princess outfit is taking liberties with the time period, but you know what, it's cool and it's sexy, so who cares? This attention to detail also goes down as deep as the furniture of the time. The covers of the collected volumes of the source manga show the characters sitting in specific couch designs from the 60s, such as Anya sitting on the famous bubble sofa in volume 2, and this attention to detail persists in the show. It just shows how much effort and research was put into recreating the time period, and it must be recognized. This will be pretty brief because I don't have a lot of specific thoughts on the soundtrack of the show, other than it's good and quite a lot of fun. Rather obviously, probably, a lot of it takes a lot of inspiration from jazz music contemporary to the time to emulate the cool feeling of 60s spy movies, while also working in guitar riffs that sound very, very 007. In particular, the soundtrack seems to like to emphasize the upright bass, as it's the most notable thing about tracks like Wise. I can't really articulate why, but it just succeeds in capturing so well the sort of sleek, sneaky feeling the show's going for. The brass section also adds several flourishes across the series, which does add a nice cool wow factor to it. The composers No Name also give Anya's Bondman show its own theme with much the same vibes as the rest of the soundtrack, which makes for both a nice attention to detail and a little bit of leaning on the fourth wall. However, I think this jazz influence is most apparent on official Hige Dandism's absolute belter of an opening song, Mixed Nuts. This is the most fun I've had with an anime opening since I started watching anime, with Komi's Cinderella now running a pretty close second. The bouncy jazz sound of it just perfectly complements the show, especially especially when paired with the opening animation that largely takes on a bright, childlike style. Also, the musicmanship on this opening song is out of this world. God, I enter new levels of incoherent when I discuss soundtracks, don't I? The soundtrack of the show also does a lot to enhance the comedy of the show. There's this one cue that pops up pretty frequently with the somewhat melodramatic title Crisis of My Home, which uses saxophones, a woodwind section, and a child's recorder to create this very silly and laid-back tone to perfectly complement any Anya-related shenanigans. The recorder is often used in of itself to play out Lloyd feeling sort of defeated in the face of dealing with Anya, and it's pretty hilarious. And then there's the song TBD, the song that plays under the castle battle in episode 5. This song, stylistically, has almost nothing to do with the rest of the soundtrack, save for a short interlude in the middle that somewhat emulates James Bond soundtracks. Most of it is instead a more modern-day rock song, which clearly only has one intention: make Lloyd's bullshit in the castle look even more badass. And make him look more badass it does, because the last chorus of the song playing under him ziplining through explosions, while I remind you playing pretend with his daughter, made for some of the hypest shit to come out of anime in years. So yeah, this soundtrack's pretty damn good. Give it a listen. Anyway, we're moving into the heavier spoiler section, so if you haven't already seen the show, what are you doing here? Watch it now. This series is incredibly well written. At first glance, a lot of it looks simple, but in some ways that's part of the brilliance of it. It doesn't show off how clever it is. For one thing, this show has some of the most efficient exposition I have ever seen in a show. The first episode is a masterclass in this, for example. Within a minute and a half of the series beginning, a man is dead, the battle between Astania and Westalis is established, and Twilight is introduced, with his penchant for disguise not only being explained, but also demonstrated in his stealing the photos from Mr. Edgar's informant. It is a breakneck speed, but it also somehow manages to work. But that's not the more impressive example of efficient writing in this episode. That comes with Anya's introduction. While after a minute her telepathic abilities are spelled out in as many words, the second she's on screen her abilities are already being telegraphed to the audience in a way that is not only clever, but perfectly consistent with the characters as we come to know them. She hears that Lloyd thinks she's only about 4 or 5, so she randomly blurts out that she's 6. She hears Lloyd think that she's a bit short, so she stands on her tiptoes. Even if the narrator hadn't said so later, these little moments quickly and efficiently explain Anya to us. She's telepathic, and she desperately wants a family and will say what she has to in order to get one. In this way, we get really efficiently set up baselines for our characters, from which the show can then branch out and explore them in further detail, which I will discuss in sections devoted to each of the main 3. This show also inhabits the world of a spy show in a really fun and interesting way. For most of its runtime, the show sits within tried and true spy tropes, paying homage to old favorites in cute ways. The magical Mission Impossible masks are clearly a favorite of Tatsuya Endo's in this respect, as it's the one most used, but you also get nods to classics like Get Smart and the photo booth Lloyd uses to get to a way station of some kind. But I think the show most excels at the darker side of espionage, the mind games and the politics. This plays really nicely in episode 8 when Lloyd catches Yuri out on being a member of the SSS when he recognizes the standardized cover story for an out-of-country mission for an SSS member. Watching Lloyd get the upper hand in a situation without Yuri ever realizing he's given himself away makes for a compelling piece of story writing, and having read a volume 2 ahead of where the show leaves off, I can safely say that the politics of the spy games is only going to get much more interesting.
But that's another story.
I touched on the direction of the comedy of this show and how the visual humor in this show is on point. Well, the written comedy of this show is also just as fun and hilarious. There is inherent comic potential in pairing a stoic, straight-laced character with a chaotic child, and while this show isn't nearly the first show to take advantage of that comedy potential, it is definitely my favorite example of it. The humor of a lot of Lloyd and Anya's interaction work on a couple of levels. The level of the cute misunderstandings Anya has, like Bacon from Baconries, and then the level of Lloyd crying and throwing up, trying to understand why someone would think this way when in fact it's just because Anya is a kid. However, there is an edge of sadness to this joke, as part of the reason Lloyd doesn't have any clue about how a kid's mind works is because he never got to have a normal childhood, as shown to us in this flashback in episode 1. And this is the most interesting part of the comedy in this show. It's always just a small step away from the darkness at the hearts of all the characters. Anya's efforts to aid Lloyd in his mission are all pretty funny, but they stem from her being desperate to maintain a family that she knows is dependent on the mission. Lloyd's quite astonishing leaps in logic when it comes to suspecting his family are funny, but speak to a sad trust complex built by years of hardship. And your side thoughts routinely make me laugh, but not just because they're hilarious, but because they're also kind of relatable. I'm not a mass murderer. I'll explain further in the your section. One of my favorite examples of this comedy tragedy duality is Anya calling Damien a shithead on several occasions in episode 10. By the way, I did look into this out of curiosity to see if Crunchyroll was taking liberties with those subtitles, but the translations for range from shithead to motherfucker, so it's possible they were actually actually toning Anya's language down. On the surface, this is just a hilarious gag involving a 4-year-old using language that will leave you wondering, where the hell did you pick that up, kid? Well, actually, we can see the place she picked it up in episode 3. In this scene, when Anya is overwhelmed by the sheer amount of hatred at the political rally, one person calls the politician giving the speech a shithead. So Anya heard something in a moment that was stressing her out, understood the anger behind it, and then used it against Damien in a childhood fight. Hilarious, but still tied to something pretty sad. It's such an interesting mechanic to employ in this show, and if it's indicative of anything, it's that one day this show is going to get dark. Also want to make a note of some of the translation work in this show because it is interesting to me. There's already a great video about the way that Anya speaks in the original Japanese of this series, so I fully recommend you watch that video, but for my point, I will summarize one of the original creators' notes thusly. Anya's use of chichi and haha is grammatically incorrect, as that is the tense one would talk about their parents to someone else in, i.e., my chichi said. If one were to go up to their dad and speak to them, one would say, Oto-san, can you help me with my algebra homework? Or something. However, no such tense exists in English, so translating this little quirk in Anya's speech pattern accurately is pretty much impossible. To Crunchyroll's credit, they did find a workaround that, whilst has nothing to do with the original Japanese grammar, does track in terms of vibe. In an early scene in the original Japanese, Lloyd instructs Anya to call him Oto-sama, a very formal version of Oto-san. Anya responds with chichi, Lloyd shrugs and accepts it. In the English subtitles, Lloyd tells her to call her father, a very formal way of addressing your father in English. Anya responds with papa, a much more relaxed title. It's not a perfect translation, but given the grammatical situation, I think it's the best they could do. It communicates the intended meaning of the chichi and haha titles perfectly, that Anya has instantly taken to her new parents and loves them dearly. Speaking of Anya, I'm just a kid and life is a nightmare. As stated earlier, I think Anya has to be one of the most realistically realized child characters I've ever seen. But this isn't just down to Tanazaki's voice acting or the little quirks added to the way she speaks. There are also other things she does, like focusing on a pool in the hospital they visit, or excitedly going badonk badonk as she goes down a set of stairs. An example so vivid it reminded me of my own siblings in their youth. These are tiny little details, but they're also super important in building a realistic child character. These all add to the realism obviously, but what really sells her is the way her character is written and her outlook on life. For a start, the way Anya's intelligence is written rings pretty true for the most part. She's not academically gifted, the traditional measure of intelligence, so she's usually written off by most around her as not being very bright at all. But she's shown to have the ability to solve problems in unorthodox ways. Now, this in of itself could have come across as a little phony if her plans were masterfully meticulous and calculated. But they're not. More frequently than not, they're based on spur-of-the-moment decisions and largely rely entirely on her telepathy to not be discovered. But they still show signs of genuine creativity. One of the better examples of this is in episode 3, when Lloyd and Anya are helping track down the robber that Yor had taken off in pursuit of. Anya spots the robber using her telepathy, but knows she can't explicitly say so because it would tip Lloyd off to the fact that she's not all she appears. She spots a bakery behind the robber, knows that with Lloyd being a spy and all, he'd pick him out of the crowd easily, and pretends she wants some cake. It's an incredibly simple plan, but it's an incredibly smart one. It's also pretty clear that her plans, no matter how clever they are hindered by her age. Her attempt to save Ken in episode 11 is one such example. Being 4 or 5, she doesn't have a lot of experience with controlling her emotions perfectly, so her attempt at hiding her panic behind playing it cool is pretty transparent. She's convinced that she can swim to Ken's rescue, but she's only so strong and ends up nearly drowning herself. I think most writers would have been tempted to make their child characters able to completely carry out their plans, but Endo does well to limit Anya in this respect. She might be really smart and incredibly brave given her attempt to save someone from drowning, but she's still only a little kid. The fact that she's only a child also lends itself well to the writing in terms of providing an interesting point of view of the events of the series. At the beginning of the season, Anya sees spies as something cool to be idolized, much the same way as we, the audience, do when we watch this show or a James Bond flick or something. And for the most part, she maintains that childlike sense of wonder about the whole thing, continuing to enjoy the exploits of Bondman on TV and getting excited when her parents are on a mission. But through the season, we start to see cracks in that idolization. The first one is a surprisingly brutal one, where Anya watches someone get shot in the face with a gun her TV hero often uses, but it's the more intricate shit that seems to hurt her more and gives more insight into how she sees things. In episode 9, she hears that Lloyd has become suspicious of Yor over the fact that Yori is secret police. Quick aside, I like that Anya doesn't initially understand the concept of the secret police. It makes sense given that I don't think that would be material that would make it into a kid's cartoon. When she hears that Lloyd is wondering if Yor is tricking him to expose him, she almost breaks and tells Lloyd that isn't true, before remembering remembering that would expose her telepathy and deflecting to telling Yor she can't cook. But obviously this continues to trouble her, so she tells them on her way to school that they should get along. This is heartbreaking, not just because she can't explain to them everything she knows, but because this statement boils down how she sees the situation. The spy stuff is almost academic. Her mom and dad are fighting, and it hurts her. Sure, initially she went with Lloyd because he was a spy and that seemed cool, but now they're her parents, and she just wants everything to be okay with her family. This also plays into the fundamental sadness at the heart of Anya's character. While her past hasn't been fully elaborated on, we know that she was largely dehumanized by the lab that raised her, and she's been returned to orphanages at least 4 times on the record. It's also implied that she remembers her birth mother to some extent, as when in episode 4 Swan demands to know which mother Anya liked best, she uses the word mama while crying, a distinct change from her usual use of haha when referring to Yor. It's probably a largely suppressed memory, but it's there enough that it causes her pain. With this in mind, Anya's drive to help Lloyd with his mission and keep her family together becomes truly heartbreaking. She just wants to be loved and to not be alone anymore, and she knows, because she's a telepath, that the only way to do that at the moment is to help Lloyd with his mission. When you factor in the fact that she hasn't seemed to rationalize through what happens after the mission is over, it becomes even sadder. Jeez, I was misty-eyed just typing this section of the script out. What a bummer this section turned out to be, huh? Yeah, let's roll some cute Anya moments to liven up the mood, shall we?
冒険じゃないただの買い物だ必殺パンチボカンペペペペいや
There we go, that's a little less miserable. Now, what was I gonna say next? Ah, yes.
Secret agent man, secret.
This is a part of the video I don't really have any adequate defense for. I mean, everyone loves Lloyd Forger, right? Such a good dad, always doing the most for Anya, king of the most romantic proposal in anime history, but yet, I don't like him. Now, when I say I don't like him, I don't mean I don't think he's written well, because he is. And it is those dimensions that make his actions so multifaceted. But at the end of the day, to me, Lloyd is an asshole. A dickhead, even. The main conflict at the heart of Lloyd is, of course, the battle between the necessity of Operation Strix and the latent feelings he has for his family. Well, I use the word latent, but they all but consume him sometimes. Throughout the series, the great secret agent Twilight is wearing the disguise of Lloyd Forger, but the more I think about Lloyd, the more it appears to me that Twilight is the real mask. Yes, I just hit you with a Superman is the real secret identity meteor analysis in the year of our Lloyd 2022. Bear with me though, I promise I can explain myself. My chief piece of evidence that Twilight is more of a mask to Lloyd than Lloyd is to Twilight is in that he occasionally has to actively remind himself to hold himself to wise operating practices. In these moments, he uses words to the effect of calm yourself, Twilight. He rarely names himself in his internal monologue, and the only times he does are in situations where his emotions are bleeding into the mission, slipping out from under his professional mask. The most obvious example that leaps to mind is in episode 4 when he gets up to break Mr. Swan's nose for making Anya cry. He is mid-swing when a voice surfaces from his mind telling him, compose yourself, Twilight. Only then does he stop, redirecting his rage into the mosquito. His instinct was to protect his family, but he has to continue to pretend to himself that he doesn't care, wearing the disguise of a super spy. I am seconds away from a this is the exact moment Walt became Heisenberg, aren't I? So now that we have my entry-level analysis as to who the real Lloyd is, let's look at the Lloyd that I consider to be the true him, Lloyd. Because this side of Lloyd is an extremely easy person to like. While he's with his family for mission reasons, quite a bit of the time his affection for them does feel entirely real, leading him to take actions that are completely irrelevant to his mission for them. The second half of the aforementioned episode 4 is rife with evidence of this, with him bristling at the blatantly sexist attacks on Yor from Mr. Swan to him demanding a different question when Swan asks Anya which mother she preferred. This latter one especially strikes me as something that Lloyd didn't have to do for his mission, but because he loves Anya, he understood immediately that this was an unfair question and demanded it be recanted. I mean, I suppose a cynical read could be that this was Twilight trying to avoid Anya screwing up and mentioning that she's adopted, but usually the show draws attention to it when Twilight has internal monologue about the fate of the mission, so I don't think that's the case here. And believe me, I have some pretty grim reads on some of his actions, as we'll soon see. Furthermore, some of the stuff Lloyd does for the family is not just not necessary for the mission, it's also entirely irrelevant. There's a running visual gag across the show of him reading Spy Wars, the comic book that Anya's Dick Tracy reference seems to be based off, and this strikes me as being really, really cute. He could be reading it just to understand Anya for the mission. Maybe that's what he tells himself. But I believe Lloyd is reading it because on some level, he wants to bond with Anya over a shared interest. And then there's the silly shit he does, like having a confetti gun ready to go for when Anya got into Eden. Tell me how that was for the mission, Lloyd. And that's just on his care for Anya. Yor says in episode 4 that Lloyd is very attentive to her needs, and I believe it. He's shown to be very considerate for Yor, comforting her when she gets in her own head about how good a wife she's been. It's all very sweet. Or at least that scene would be if it weren't on the heels of the worst thing Twilight had ever done to her. And this is why, despite my praise of what a loving person Lloyd is, I don't like his character on a personal level. Because you cannot separate Twilight's actions from Lloyd, no matter how much you want to. And the Twilight side of him is an awful person. Now, on one hand, I get it. Twilight is, in essence, a trauma response. Lloyd's childhood was, from the little context we've seen of it in this season, fucking awful. That coupled with the stringent training from Wise, and we have a persona that has learned not to trust anyone, to see everyone as pieces on a board to be moved in the interests of international espionage. Because of this, Twilight behaves in ways that are heartless and callous. In the first episode, after Lloyd's initial panic after Anya is kidnapped, Twilight says in internal monologue something to the effect of, "Oh, screw it, I'll just get another kid." Obviously, he didn't follow through, but the fact that this was even an option to this side of Lloyd's psyche speaks to a deeply learned callousness. There are less extreme examples of Twilight behaving this way, such as his mild mind games to get Anya to apologize to Damien in episode 7. But the one that had me in the most vicious rage was in episode 9, with the way he treated Yor. Now, yeah, I get it. She's related to SSS. Probably best to do some recon on her. But the depths to which Twilight takes it, terrorizing what he believes to just be an office clerk by dressing up as the secret police and threatening to arrest her just to get a reaction out of her, is just way too far. It's callous, vicious, and in the context of them being married, fucking emotional abuse. It was an act of cruelty so monumental in my mind that it truly cost him all of the goodwill he'd built up to that point in the series. Oh, but Lloyd felt guilty about it afterwards, so it's all okay. Fuck you, dude. My rage aside, that guilt after trying to scare Yor does speak to the central conflict of this character. Hey, look, I finally got to the point. At heart, I think Lloyd wants to be the family man, the better man than he is in the field. But he still needs Twilight. Twilight keeps him alive and keeps his head in the game as far as Operation Strix goes. I think what we'll see going forward is him struggling to find a new balance between his emotions and the Twilight mask as he grows with the family, balancing who he wants to be with the person he needs to be for the mission. I think as we watch that growth, he'll become a much better person. But for now, I don't know, man. I want to like him, but right now I don't. However, I am in love with Yor Forger. I'm hardly even being funny. I haven't crushed this hard on a fictional character in years. But here we are. I am down astonishingly for her. She could marry me or kill me, and I would be overjoyed by either outcome. All right, that's enough of that. So now that I've cleared the air on any possible bias and also set myself up for bullying in my comment section, I will now try to separate all that from my reasons as to why I think she's a brilliantly written character. To me, there is in the general fandom a fundamental misread of Yor as a character, that when she's on the job, she becomes this cold-blooded killer with no second thought to her actions. It certainly appears that way at first glance in episode 2 when she assassinates Vice Minister Brennan. But as the season unfolds, her relationship with her violent work becomes more and more complex. The more we learn about her, the more she becomes this massive ball of irony wrapped in a socially anxious package, an assassin with a massive heart. While Lloyd's public displays of love for his family come from a place of wanting to keep up pretenses, Yor's love for her newfound family has never felt to me to be anything but sincere. It really seems to me that she adored Anya from the moment they met. Part of this probably comes from her being good with kids on account of raising Yuri by herself for much of her life, but it's definitely deeper than that. Her tears when Anya runs away from her in episode 3 is a bit of a blink and you miss it gag, but it speaks to something a lot deeper. She truly wants this kid she just met to like her and feel safe around her. Within a week, she's prepared to rip Mr. Swan's throat out for making Anya cry. I could honestly sit and dissect every interaction Yor and Anya have to this end, partially because it's also damn cute, but I think I've made my point here. This love for people also extends to Lloyd and the implicit trust she seems to have for him. Yuri states over the phone that he thinks Yor is gullible, but I found this to be a little unfair to her. Trusting to a fault, however, that I would say is one of Yor's main character flaws. Perhaps it's because of my irritation towards Lloyd that I expressed ad nauseum earlier, but it honestly bothers me to see her trust so much a man who dressed up as the KGB to try and get information out of her. But the more relevant example of her trust here is in episode 2 when Lloyd doesn't turn up at the train station and she stands there for hours, worrying that he might have gotten himself hurt before finally deciding she'd been stood up. The fact that it took that long for that thought to cross her mind speaks to the core of her character in my mind. She always wants to see the best in people. I think in some ways, if she's not going to go insane from her job, She has to. It's why she goes to that park to watch the city go by when her work gets her down, to remind herself that people are the good and kind people she believes them to be, and that her job is ultimately worth it. This moves nicely into Yor's relationship with her job because that also has several layers that can be broken apart. For a start, while she is trained in killing people in very colorful ways, she seems to opt away from doing that as much as possible. The image of killing a random Eden parent doesn't just strike her as not an option because she doesn't kill innocents, she also appears upset by the image, shaking it from her head, which is something I'll come back to. And while she drunkenly nearly killed Lloyd in the castle for trying to take Anya, when she's sober, she doesn't exact lethal force onto threats to Anya. She gives the kidnappers in episode 6 a chance to run while they can. She looks distressed by the idea that she might have killed the Austanian agent in episode 12. One might argue this is a professionalism thing, that she keeps herself to only killing those that the shopkeep sets her upon, but her distress in some of these situations points to something a bit deeper, I think. I truly think that she doesn't like killing people. I mentioned this to one of my friends, and we ended up having a discussion where she disagreed, saying that in a future arc, it is made plain that Yor believes in her job, that she believes she is making the world a better place. And that I definitely believe is true. But as we've already established, she is by far the most empathetic of the characters we've met. So I think there are layers at play here. Just as Lloyd is growing exhausted from his job, persevering for the ideal of making a world safe for children, Yor too pushes through a fatigue of her own for the sake of a better world, a wariness of the violence of her job. She doesn't like killing people, but she believes it's helping people. More tragically perhaps, she knows she's good at it, and sometimes believes it's the only thing she's good at. This leads nicely into another idea I have about Yor, that being the effect her assassin job has had on her mental health, because it looks to be utterly disastrous. There's the most obvious stuff, that she was groomed to be a killer by the Garden from a very young age. That in of itself would mess anybody up. But then there's the more subtle shit, such as her crippling self-worth problems. As I just said, she believes that killing is one of two things she's good at, the other thing being cleaning up after her assassinations. When she works at the city hall, she's surrounded by so-called normal people, and she absorbs a lot of the social norms about womanhood in the 60s. She compares herself to these ideals, and when she falls short of what society expects of a woman of the time, she feels like shit, sinking further into her job because it's something she knows she's good at. I honestly believe that this is part of the control the Garden groomed into her as they turned her into a killer. If you cripple your operatives with mental health that keeps them tethered to you, you can probably control them easier. The end result is that Yor carries around a sense of almost self-loathing, the subtext of which is that she sees herself as unlovable, I think. I might be projecting my own bullshit onto her there. This is why Lloyd and Anya are so vital to her, I think. They appear to love her for who she is. Anya says in pretty much as many words that she loves her mama, who is strong and cool. Lloyd treats her as an equal, valuing her input in raising Anya and reassuring her when she beats herself up. Not only do they provide an opportunity for her to give the love she has for people to someone outside of Yuri, but they also provide her with a chance to feel loved, outside of the control of the Garden or the idolization Yuri presents her with. Overall, at the beginning of the show, I just wanted Yor to kill me. But by the end of the season, I just want to give her a hug. The number of times I shouted at Lloyd just to give her a hug and tell her she's doing great was probably slightly too many times. But whatever. Oh yeah, time to come back to that thing about the jokes of Yor's random murder thoughts, because I've claimed twice in this video that I'd come back to that, and I haven't yet. It would be super easy to just write that off as, haha, she's crazy innit, but I think that would be unfair. This is 90% probably me projecting, but I think those are intrusive thoughts. They appear suddenly, are very vivid, and distress Yor quite a bit. If that doesn't sum up my own life with intrusive thoughts, I don't know what does. And even if that wasn't intentional, once that connection clicked in my head, it just made me feel seen, if that makes sense. Seeing a character who I love as much as I do seem to struggle with something that I do was oddly comforting. I also appreciate that her intrusive thoughts are occasionally ridiculous. The one she had about a handbag dog attacking Anya with a knife had me laughing out loud, partially because of how stupid an image that was, but because it really did nicely sum up the more stupid bullshit your brain throws at you when you have intrusive thoughts. Now, as I said, it might not be exactly that. My friend believes it could be maladaptive daydreaming, which does seem equally likely to me, but it's an observation I thought I'd mention anyway because it just brings a nice extra level of depth to Yor as a person.
Listen, one more thing. It'll just take a second.
This section will consist of things that I noted that I really like in the show that I can't find a proper place for in this video. Some are actual points, some are stupid jokes. So here goes. Anyone else think that Wise needs a new way of communicating their codes? Identifying a code by making the sound of an animal whose name starts with that code's letter designation seems flimsy to me. I have absolutely no proof of this, but I think Frankie might be something of a Tatsuya Endo self-insert. I genuinely have no idea why, I just get that vibe. This threat that Lloyd issues to Mr. Edgar is hilarious. Hey, Mr. Edgar, if you don't leave me alone, I'll have your daughter thrown in prison. Oh, and also had sex with her, so fuck you. So look, I know it's just an incidental parental drama thing to get Yor into the picture. But what is up with this two-parent only thing at Eden? Like, what if one of them died? What if they got divorced?
Divorce is only something they do in England.
There is a running visual gag of this series of Yor instantly crying the moment something hurts her feelings, and while it's sad to see what is making her sad, the transition itself just reminds me of a gag in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
You shut your mouth, Liz.
No, you shut your mouth, Sanj. That was funny.
Does Yor's blade fetish ever come back? There are 2 jokes about it in this episode, but I don't remember it ever coming up again. So like, is Bondman's show live action, or is it a cartoon? Because Anya describes it as a cartoon a few times, I'm sure, but in episode 5 it said it was filmed in a physical location. So which is it? This might be the biggest inconsistency on the show, actually. So if this translation of Lloyd is to be believed, he is quoting The Sound of Silence, which not only suggests that Simon and Garfunkel canonically exist in the Spy Family universe, but that the show has to take place after September of 1965.
I did just Google that.
Anya saying she hit Damien for Becky is multifaceted because part of it is her trying to dance out of being in trouble, but it also strikes me as being partially honest. Like, Henderson just said that straight up lying was bad, so it makes sense to me that she wouldn't lie per se. Also, we saw her look down as Damien steps on Becky's foot, so she definitely saw it. I also just love how the school sections are written. Lines like, "You'll catch they're stupid," do ring pretty true to my memories of primary school. I love how Sylvia is giving Lloyd a speech about discretion while meeting in a cafe, the most public place possible for that sort of conversation. Yeah, nice one, Sylvia. I know I already waxed lyrical about what a kind person Yor is, but the fact that she's genuinely worried for Lloyd's health in episode 12 to the extent that she is just, she's too fucking sweet for everything that's happened to her. It's not fucking fair. You know, I kind of wish I'd done with this show what I did with Titans when I first started this channel, in terms of making a new video for each episode that came out. It would have provided me the opportunity to really dig deep into a lot of things I barely touched on in this video. But alas, such a thing isn't possible with my schedule these days, so this is where we are at the moment. In a week, Spy Family will be back on the air, and having read ahead a little bit, I can safely say that this coming part will be just as great as the one we've already watched. I'm really looking forward to having this show in my life again, being able to sit on a Saturday lunchtime and watch the new episode before I go to work. This show is everything I could ever want in a show. It has its dark elements, but it's also hilarious. It's full of endearing characters, but at the heart of it, it has a family who are truly beginning to fall in love with each other. And that's something that will always bring a little more brightness to my day.